The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Today, I'm very excited to have Brian McComak join us. Brian, welcome.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'm delighted to be here.
Yes, so you are the CEO and founder of Hummingbird Humanity, a diversity and inclusion focused consulting firm, and you work with some very well-known clients like Toyota, Moody's, Tremor International, and a whole bunch of others. And you built your business up to, I believe, about 20 team members or so, if I'm correct.
That is correct. And I still don't know how that all happened, but maybe we'll find out while we're in this conversation.
Exactly. Let's kind of get into it. We'll see what we can uncover and maybe we can put the pieces together. I have to tell you before we actually kind of dive too deep, the name of your company resonates with me instantly because probably hummingbirds are my favorite birds. My daughters and I, my wife, we have a hummingbird feeder right outside of our house in one of the main windows. And so we have hummingbirds coming throughout the whole year. And it's really fun to watch them. And they're really amazing birds. So when I saw the name of your company, I was instantly kind of attracted to find out more.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And yeah, it's been fun. I think sometimes you happen upon in this journey of building a new business, you happen upon something that just works. And that name is I get these compliments. It's one of the most common things that I get to hear, which is really cool. And it's a name that people can remember. So there's a couple things I'll share about the name of the business. So one is I have some colleagues who I admire and respect and so love them, and they've helped me in their journey that named their firms after them. And I didn't want the firm to be named after me because I wanted it to be bigger than me in many ways. And also our primary mission is to amplify the voices of the unheard. So I didn't want to lead with my name. So that was one piece of the puzzle. Another piece of the puzzle is I knew that I wanted the word human or humanity to be in the title. And my work is all about creating workplace cultures where humans thrive. And I've been known, and one of my favorite compliments from one of my colleagues at Tapestry once, Tapestry, for those who don't know, is the home of Coach Kate Spade and Stuart Weitzman. Margaret Cody, who is the head of corporate social responsibility, she said, Brian, I love that you always remind us that the decisions we're making are about humans. So I'm like, yes, that has to be the name of the company. And hummingbirds are creatures that are surprising and unexpected. And there's certainly much more to them than what you might first expect if you just sort of happened upon one in nature. And I think that is a beautiful analogy for the work that we do, which is if you see any human, the initial perceptions and judgments and biases and all the things that come up in your mind, some of those might be accurate, but more likely there's so much more to the story. And I think the hummingbird is a great icon to remind us that let's not judge a book by its cover. Let's get to know the rest of the story. And who doesn't love a little alliteration, of course? So.
Well, there you go. But I think it's actually an important message because so often, especially when we start talking about like marketing and business development and sales, people tend to kind of default to transactions and not thinking about people as people. Yet the relationships and the connection can really be such an advantage if you choose to leverage that by really focusing on a deeper connection or a deeper kind of level of interaction or relationship. So you brought up a good reminder for all of us here. I want to go back in time a little bit, not that far back, because I want to focus on May of 2020.
Can you time travel, Michael? If you can time travel, let's do that.
Listen, I've been known to pull out some really very surprising activities or behaviors. So maybe that's one of them. But you spent about a decade. Actually, I don't know if it was you spent a decade, but I guess it was a decade ago that you were at Christie's and then at Disney before you decided to start your consulting business, which I believe was in May of 2020. And I'm wondering if you can take us back to the earlier career and then to that decision. Why May of 2020? Like what was going on and why go out and start this consulting business after working at some of the top kind of most respected brands and organizations out there? Why not kind of continue climbing the corporate ladder?
Yeah, thank you for asking. That's such a good question. And actually, one of the things you won't really find online anymore is I'm in my third or fourth career. So My very first career was in movie theater operations. I worked for AMC Theaters for 10 years, and I opened AMC's flagship megaplex at Walt Disney World, which was AMC Pleasure Island 24 theaters, which at that time was the busiest movie theater in the world. So I had a great career in movie theater operations, went back to school to get my master's in human resources. That degree was specifically in human resources and change management, and it was a consulting degree is really the work that we did, and we consulted with real life companies. So I think that really set this foundation for me for how I showed up in workplaces as an HR person. I did lots of different HR roles in different types of organizations and sizes of organizations. And I was a generalist and a HR business partner, and I've been in some specialist roles. But I intentionally chose to work in a variety of different types of roles and companies because I just had this feeling at some point I was going to be a consultant. Let's be honest, though, I didn't really know what that meant. I just said I need to draw from a variety of experiences. So that was really intentional for me. And you're right. I've been really fortunate. Christie's Auction House, the Walt Disney Company, Tapestry, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, L'Oreal. I've worked for some really phenomenal organizations and have had the chance to learn from each of them. Looking back, let's say about 3 years ago now, fall of 2019 is when I left corporate life, in-house corporate life, I should say. And what was happening for me then was I just had this internal desire to, we'll use a hummingbird analogy, spread my wings and sort of step out of the four walls of corporate. I loved being an ambassador and representing Tapestry and the phenomenal brands at Tapestry and the Walt Disney Company and everything that Disney brings to the world. So many wonderful stories to share. And I wanted the opportunity to share my story. So that was why I took the leap to try the world of consulting. The May of 2020 launch is really just sort of the intersection of the realities of time. In March of 2020, I wasn't sure that my career was going to be a career anymore because DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion budgets got cut across corporate America very quickly. And I really launched Hummingbird initially as it was really a branding play. I'm like, I need to stay relevant in the conversation. So I have this idea. I might as well launch it. And I started with a live weekly conversation series called Hope, Heart, and the Human Spirit with people that I admire who are trying to make the world a better place.
And
so
what was the platform for that, Brian? Sorry to interrupt. But
sure. No, please. It was a live Zoom event. So we just invited people to join a live Zoom conversation, which that happened a lot back in that spring of 2020. And so we had a community of 50 to 75 people that would join us each week and ask questions and engage in the dialogue. And so that was a really beautiful start to this journey. And both its Hope, Heart, and the Human Spirit is something that we all needed then, but I think it's something we all just actually need in the workplace as well. So it was very authentic to who I am and what I believe in. And through the tragedy of George Floyd, because I had just hung my shingle, as we say, I started getting calls from organizations that asked if I could help them on their journey. And so Hummingbird all of a sudden went from being a website and a weekly live Zoom conversation to having clients.
Right. I mean, and kind of back to the whole Hummingbird, right? You flapped your wings very quickly and went from you to 20 people in 2 years or so, which is quite rapid growth. I would imagine that the headcount growth also aligned to a degree with revenue growth, and that you weren't taking on outside investment or putting all of your savings into it. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I guess what I'm interested, so we can talk more about that, or as much as you're open to sharing. One thing that I am wondering is, so it sounds like you kind of just created this online Zoom series where you were talking about stuff that was relevant, that was on your mind. And then you said people started calling you. So organizations started reaching out, given what was going on in the world and in the US, especially at that time. Were these people that you already had a relationship with? Were these people that just had attended the Zoom meetings? Like, how did those first clients find out about you and know to reach out?
It's a great question. So the business for the first 18 months was all built through my network.
Okay.
Now, and that played out a few different ways. So there are some people that were already in my network that had said, hey, like they were the person who wanted me to come and help them, or Hummingbird to come help them. Someone needed someone to help them, and someone in my network said, oh, you should reach out to Brian. So there were introductions, so warm handoffs from people that were trusted to say, hey, you can trust Brian and you can trust the Hummingbird team for what the work they do. One of the clients that we have today So Jennifer Brown is one of those colleagues that I mentioned earlier. So Jennifer Brown has Jennifer Brown Speaks, which is her speaking business, and she has Jennifer Brown Consulting, which is her consulting
she's been
business.
on the podcast before as
Oh,
well.
she has. She's amazing. Yeah. She's one of my mentors and advisors. And during that first summer of 2020, Jennifer gave me the opportunity to play the role of Jennifer. She actually was twice a week. She brought together the JBC community. And if she couldn't make the call to host, then I hosted for her. Mm-hmm. So there are some people who found me through that community that have reached out. So people who sort of, I didn't necessarily know personally, but they had experienced a conversation with me or been in rooms with me and said, hey, this is someone I think I can trust and believe in. So it was all really through my community that the business was built. Our first client that we have identified that came through a web search, we signed them this past spring. Yeah. And it was actually our biggest client that we signed to date. So it was a really big deal for us. And yeah. Not only to get that lead, but also to actually win the business. And the thing that I loved about that winning the business is, and we try to think about winning the business is what many of us would say in the consulting space from a business side, but anytime we have a chance to do additional work, we're making an impact. So we always try to lead with like, what's the value that we're making and the impact we're making. But the why they chose us was, they said, we talked with a bunch of different firms, and some firms were like, we didn't understand what they were saying. So they weren't the right fit. And most firms, they said they spoke with, said, here's how we do it, and we'll just come in and do it this way. But they said that Hummingbird was the only firm that they felt was going to stand by them step by step and actually teach them, guide them, answer their questions, really be engaged partners. Our work is to, how do we set people up for success to be able to do it on their own? Because we can't always be there.
Brian, let me drive a little bit deeper into that for a moment and kind of explore that a little bit. How intentional are you and your team in that sales process, in that early conversation kind of stage with buyers to set the positioning that that's how you approach things? Like, is that just natural and not really planned? Like you all are just very focused on the client? Or do you, in fact, kind of instruct or talk with your team members that when we're speaking to a buyer, like, here's how we're going to do it, and we're going to be very kind of consultative, we're going to get a lot of information from them, like kind of walk through what is the best practice or the approach that you all take at your company to get that kind of feedback from a new client?
Yeah. So I would love, and others have heard me say this, I would love to say I had this very intentional strategic plan that I put on paper and we're like, this is how we're going to do it. Right. I sort of felt my way through it, and I felt my way through it with the advice and counsel from people like Jennifer Brown and Eduardo Placer, if you've ever met him, who owns Fearless Communicators, and Andy Rice, another friend of mine who runs a firm called Black Box Consulting. So I had these people who had come before me who gave of their time and energy and wisdom and experience. But of course, they weren't in my head. So I listened to what they had to say. One of the things I learned from Andy was he has this belief in intellectual generosity. So he says, like, I don't want everything to be like so I'm going to give you a sentence and you're going to give me $5. And like, it's overly transactional. And so he's like, no, like, I'll just share the sentence with you or the answer. Right. And if that leads to something bigger, great. If it doesn't, then I'm glad to be of help and be of service. I think what really happened for Hummingbird, though, is my training is as predominantly as an HR business partner. And for those who aren't familiar with that role in corporate America, in the 80s and early 90s, corporate America went through significant reorganizations and cut out layers of management and organizational structures and paid millions and hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, I don't know the numbers, to consulting firms to do that. What was realized is you needed that companies could bring in consulting experience to do much of that work internally rather than outsourcing it to big consulting firms. So an HR business partner is a person who is an internal consultant and coach and advisor and influencer. And so that's what my training was. And all of that is bespoke. It's all custom to whatever function I'm working with. If I was working with the CIO or the chief HR officer or chief financial officer, then the plans, what we needed to do for those groups of humans were different. So when we started to do client engagements with Hummingbird, I leaned on what I knew, which is each client, each group of humans is going to need a different solution. So what's evolved over time, though, so we are now intentional about it. And the way that we say it today is that we absolutely have methodologies and tools and frameworks and materials that we borrow from. And we always adjust the approach or the content to meet the needs of the specific group of humans in your organization or your function or your department. Because this work, and if we're talking specifically around DEI, where you're starting from, this one group of humans is going to start from a different place from another group, and we want to meet you where you are.
Yeah.
The other thing that has actually happened, and we're actually in the process of repositioning Hummingbird, is diversity, equity, and inclusion is really a perspective on organizational culture. And my background is largely in organizational culture, employee experience, and change management. So we're repositioning Hummingbird to focus on organizational culture because that also naturally is what we do through the lens of DEI, but it allows us to play in more ways and to really make a broader impact with our clients. And our clients are telling us, they're like, you're doing culture work with us, so let's just call it what it is. So that's something that's also been evolving organically. And I think that's been part of our magic. Is we didn't say, these are the boxes we're going to fit into. We said, let's find out how we can add value and see where it takes us.
So I'm wondering, one of the challenges that many consultants face, especially as they're building their teams and looking to scale and grow, is that the more moving parts that you have, so the more kind of custom work that you're doing, that is harder to build, in many cases, systems and processes and SOPs around that, because there's just more moving, right? There's kind of more complexity. It sounds like you have a great deal of customization that goes into meeting your clients where they are, but you also are leveraging like a playbook or processes or systems that you've developed because you know that they work and you don't need to reinvent them. But I'm wondering, like, what percentage of what you bring to a typical engagement is something that you've used with a previous client or a previous engagement, and what percent is very customized?
I would say that by and large at this point, it's 10 to 20% is customized. So it's more about how do we adjust module in a training program, or how do we ask a different handful of questions in our employee experience survey. Right. Then there are things like if we are building their strategic roadmap for infusing diversity, equity, and inclusion in their organization, we have plans we've built before so they can serve as ideas for this, but it's all based on what did we learn during the assessment to build that plan. So each of those can look a little different. What has been exciting though for us is there are projects that are 100% bespoke today that we are engaged with clients to deliver because they have worked with us for 2 years and they know we can now build this, whatever it is. So one of our clients, for example, wanted to create a multi-part series for inclusive leadership. So we're developing a multi-part inclusive leadership workshop series that includes some coaching elements in it and includes some toolkits that they can take back to with their team. So that is something that we're developing soup to nuts, bespoke for that organization.
How do you think about, as a leader of your company, think about when to say no to potential work, right? Just setting up the scenario for a moment. Let's say you've worked with a client, you've created a fantastic outcome for them. They're excited to engage you and your company in more work. But what if the work that they want is not the core? So it still connects to what you're doing, but it does require you to build a whole bunch of new material. And so that work may or may not be as profitable as the work that you would typically do because you're leveraging the playbooks or the systems or processes that you already have. So I'm wondering, for you, what does the thought process look like, or what has your experience been with taking on new work that may not be kind of in the core of what you've been doing, or just how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's actually an ongoing conversation that I have with the leadership team at Hummingbird. And the leadership team for Hummingbird, there are 4 of us. So there's Nick Reich, who's the president and COO of Hummingbird. There's Bianca Chow, who's our head of consulting. And then there's Tony Booker, who is an executive coach. So she works with each of us individually and the group of us collectively. And so that's her primary role, but we consider her part of the leadership team because she helps us make good decisions, hopefully. Yeah. She's really phenomenal. I've learned so much from her. And we started this conversation, I want to say probably back in the spring, about what are the circles that, like the center circle is what is in our core set of core capabilities and where do we want to really position ourselves? And then what's the adjacent set of capabilities that we could do, but maybe not be the best use of our time, or that we might not do as well as someone else. And then there's this third ring, which is connected conversations that emerge, but don't really fit in what we would do. So an example of that is, so we do deliver training in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that would fall in our core wheelhouse, as well as building strategic roadmaps and doing assessments and sort of standing up some of those programs. So that's where we sit. But one place that is adjacent to us, but we don't do, is we're not an outsourced replacement for your head of HR. Could I be a head of HR? Sure. Could I do that on a part-time basis, 20 hours a week, be a head of HR for a company that needed it on an interim basis? Probably. And I could make money doing that. But that really takes me away from our core business. So we partner with Jamie Klein, who runs a firm called Inspire Human Resources, and we have a referral relationship with them. So they don't do DEI work. So they send that business to us and we send them leads if someone's looking for interim coverage for a head of HR role. Right. And I know both of us have a variety of firms that we're strategic partners with. And then that third rung is, I mentioned Eduardo and Fearless Communicators earlier. So our work is, as I mentioned earlier, we're committed to amplifying the voices of the unheard. So we tend to end up working with organizations who are then thinking, okay, how do I develop the capabilities of our communities of color that are part of our company? And we have some leaders who want in that community who we want to develop their speaking capabilities. Well, that's not what we do, but Fearless Communicators develops speaking skills for really anyone, but their focus is on women of color. And so we can send them to the Fearless Communicators to say, this is a great firm that you can trust. So we try to have those partnerships, and we continue to try to get clear on where we sit and where we don't sit and who our partners are. And that's just a work in progress.
Hey, it's Michael here, and we'll be right back to the podcast. But first, are you ready to grow, scale, and take your consulting business and marketing to the next level? If so, our Clarity Coaching program may be a great fit for you. You'll work with our experienced team to set up a strategic plan for your business and coach you step by step in areas like how to consistently attract more leads, develop a magnetic message that resonates with your ideal clients, strategically package and position your services, earn higher fees, win more proposals, and scale your business. To find out more about Clarity Coaching and apply, go to consultingsuccess.com and click on coaching.
How do you handle, though, the communication when you have a referral partner, or strategic kind of partnership? Is that something that you share with your client right away and say, hey, we have this partnership with this other organization. We're going to send you over to them, have a conversation. If you do decide to engage with them, we receive some kind of compensation. Or I'm wondering, how do you treat that kind of structure and the communication with the client around that?
Yeah. So one of our commitments just in the work we do is that transparency is important. So we try to be as upfront and transparent when we're making those introductions as possible. And some of them, like if I use the example I just shared, we do have a formal relationship with Inspire. Fearless, we don't have that type of referral agreement with, because we're not typically sending a lot of people to each other because our work is so different. So we would just be honest about that. But we believe in transparency because it's part of the way you create diverse, equitable, inclusive environments. And we also believe that transparency builds trust. And we want to build long-term, trusted, collaborative partnerships. And that plays out in a variety of ways. This is not a question you just asked, but as we've been building our systems, we've had a couple hiccups with how our calculations from our time management system then lead to an invoice that gets to a client. And at the end of the day, I guess I have to make a living. We have to pay our bills. But if our system got something wrong or we didn't really figure that out when it got to the client, we're going to make it right. So like if I lost $500 on this because we could have done it better, then I lost $500. But I don't want to lose the client over $500 because there's a much longer, bigger picture to look at. And in those couple of moments that I can think of, there's two specifically that come to mind over the last year, which feels pretty good for a new business. Both of those clients are like, we already love everything that you do. And now we love you more because you're owning your stuff and you're fixing it. And that's who we want to work with.
So you've had a pretty rapid development or kind of growth in terms of your team inside of the business over the last couple of years or so. Take me back to the early days in 2020 when you were starting. Who were the first few hires? How do you kind of think about growing the business and who do you bring into the company first? And if we kind of lay that out as a bit of a progression or chapters in a book, take me through kind of from start to where you are today. And you don't have to go over every single one, but just kind of roughly, like how did you think through strategically who to hire and when to hire them?
Yeah, happy to share. And one thing I want to make sure that I am transparent about in the spirit of what we were just talking about a few minutes ago is, yes, the community of workers at Hummingbird, actually, I think we're approaching 25 altogether. Some are full-time, some are part-time W-2, some are part-time 1099. and some are project 1099. So it's a very wide range of like how often people work, and certainly they're based all over the country. And we actually have 2 people internationally now, which is very exciting. So
Brian, once I've heard to interrupt, but for those that are outside of the US wondering 1099, right? So essentially contractors is what you're referring to.
Yes, exactly. Contractors. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. It's always good to remember who our audience is. So yeah, those contractors versus employees.
Yeah. All good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So one thing that I figured out was I'm going to lean into, and I did lean into the things that I enjoy the most and that get me the most excited. So that's pretending that I'm a brand person and a marketer. So I worked with Taylor Bevan, who runs a firm called Robot Bubble, to develop the brand aesthetic and the website and get launched. And that was necessary for the beginning. And Taylor stuck with us for 2.5 years. He's still with us on a very sort of occasional basis, but we've sort of outgrown Taylor's services. But he really was a phenomenal start to that journey. When the firm launched, the first person I hired as an employee was actually about to be college graduate. His name's Ben Green, an openly transgender man, amazing human. And the 2 of us sort of did it on our own for the most part, with like an occasional contractor to help with a project here and there for much of the first year. And then we sort of grew during that year until Ben and the business was busting at the seams. And that was a year ago, summer of 2021, when that happened. The catalyst for that moment, I think, is really interesting, is I chose to invest in a really sort of what felt like a substantial amount of money at that time in developing our first thought leadership paper. So I hired a recent Goldman Sachs professional to come and help us build this thought leadership paper. That paper and that investment was really the key catalyst for Hummingbird. And maybe it was also that we hit a year. So those intersected, and all of a sudden we just had so much more business than what we could respond to.
Just to pause you for a moment, because I want to dig into this and not gloss over. I think it's really interesting. So you're talking about you developing this thought leadership paper, investing a significant amount into it. Can you give us a sense, first of all, when you say significant amount, like roughly how much was it?
I think altogether, I probably spent close to 20 on the design, development, editing, the marketing, all of the pieces of that. And going back to your question earlier, I have not taken investors. And so I have borrowed a little bit from my mom and dad and my sister. I've paid them all back now. So I'm really fortunate that I had family that could help me with that. And I borrowed a little bit from my savings and from my financial capital, but it's really been a self-funded business. And so like, that's the other thing there of like, that money feels like a lot when it's coming out of my pocket.
Sure. So a year in, you decide to invest a nice chunk of money into developing this paper. Now, I think what's going to be very interesting, I'd love to hear, is you have this paper and it could be the most beautiful paper. It can have great information in it, but how do you get that in front? Like, walk us from you now have this product to getting it in the hands of the right people, and then having the right people actually reach out as a result saying, hey, we want to engage with you. Like, how did you actually leverage that thought leadership paper into conversations and paying clients?
Yeah. So a few things intersected. So the firm that helped us develop the paper is called Prideful Hearts. And so Prideful Hearts is a sister agency, or really they have Abe Studios, which is their marketing or creative agency that they predominantly work with construction industries. And so they wanted to have their sort of purpose-driven version of their brand, which is Prideful Hearts. So they have the ability to do social media strategy, and they have the ability to place articles in publications, and they can certainly do all the creative design. So they did all of those pieces for us. So some of that was paid marketing dollars that got that message out more broadly. We also did a launch campaign, invited and had a few that we were also doing the second iteration of that live conversation series via Zoom. It's now called Hummingbird Hour. So we did a special edition of Hummingbird Hour. And we did a part of that, which I sort of alluded to earlier, was there was a specific social media campaign that pulled quotes from the paper that then went on our social media channels. What then happened, though, going back to this sort of connecting a few of these dots here, is that started to drive more business development activity. All of a sudden, we just were on more radars. And we also launched a children's book at the same time, or the month later. So we did a lot in summer of 2021. And then I had to decide, okay, I have to sleep at some point. And what am I better at? So as I said earlier, I'm a consultant. I love to like add value and do this work. I love marketing and branding. I sort of skipped all of the let's build internal systems that are going to help this business scale. So the first full-time position I hired was a COO. And that's when Nick joined. And I asked Nick to say, I need you to run like all of the core of the business so I can be in business development calls and I can be delivering on these consulting engagements. And that was a significant accelerator for the business, because the business you see today really, and the team you see today, has been really built over the course of the last 13, 14 months. And it was because I said, I have to focus on the growth of the business, not the operation of the business.
Yeah. That's a brave step for you to take, because many entrepreneurs would look at that and go, okay, to invest in a COO is not insignificant, I would imagine. I don't know what the compensation was, but I'm sure it was an investment. That's money out of your pocket, right? That doesn't necessarily translate into new dollars right away. And so a lot of people view that potentially as an expense as opposed to an investment. And I'm wondering if you could share with us a little bit of, it sounds like the experience has been a very positive one. It's been the accelerator for growth. But did you have any concerns? And how were you thinking just from a mindset perspective around that decision to, again, make another significant investment into the business and actually kind of delegate or shift a lot of day-to-day key parts of the business to somebody away from yourself?
So concern would be like the most subtle way you could possibly put it. I just spent money on this thought leadership paper. I spent more than I should have on the launch of the children's book, which was a great learning for me. And now I'm hiring a full-time person. And not only am I hiring a full-time person, I'm hiring a full-time person who is, not to discount like as college graduates who need a real job and stability, but he's a dad, he has kids, he has a mortgage. And I'm like, you're going to come and you're going to trust that I'm going to make sure I can pay you. And of course, I haven't missed a payroll and that's not how I roll, but that was terrifying for me. And actually, it led to this series of conversations where I was like, how did I become a CEO? Who told me I could do this? And so my coach and Nick were both like, you got to be a CEO now. You got to do this job. Part of the reason I hired Nick, though, is, and so this has been both really rewarding for us and also really challenging for the two of us, is Nick's previous two roles were as CEO. So I hired him because I knew I could learn from him. I wanted someone who knew more than I did to help me, which is awesome. He also wasn't used to playing the role that he plays now. And I'm actually more comfortable in that job. So we had to sort of like figure out how to like translate and share. And now it's fantastic, but it really took some very intentional communication for us. And it has been an accelerator, but it was a difficult journey. Once I got through that journey, though, hiring the second and third full-time people, which were in January of this year, that wasn't scary anymore because we now had enough of a pipeline and a revenue stream. And so the business has continued to grow from there. And we're actually in the process of hiring a couple more full-time people, another investment for the next acceleration of our business in advance of my book launch next spring. And it still feels risky, but I now have more information. We have better systems. We have reports. I have information. I have people who can say, how do we make sure we're building our pipeline for business development? And how are we managing costs in the organization in a responsible way? And I won't pretend it's all perfect, but there are people in it with me.
So you mentioned that Nick, a father, has a mortgage, needs to essentially make sure there's some stability in his income and salary. It almost sounded like, hey, you probably could have gotten more money somewhere else. And so I'm wondering, what do you think was the main, and maybe I'm wrong on that, so correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but I'm wondering, why do you think he came to you? What was the hiring, or what was the conversation? Was it around values? Or, everyone out there, especially in today's environment, is looking for great people. If you're looking to build your team, it's not necessarily the easiest thing for a lot of people. What do you learn through that process, or what do you think you're able to share with others when it comes to attracting great talent?
Yeah, I know I can say this on Nick's behalf. So, and I use the CEO role title for his previous roles because it's more translatable for most people. But the title he was probably had was executive director. So he ran not-for-profit organizations. So part of this for Nick was he realizes there's a greater potential in earnings for him if he moved to the for-profit space. So that was a piece of it. And yet, of course, now that I know Nick very well, he's not really driven or motivated at all by money. So what I've really learned is that Nick really believes in the vision for Hummingbird and the message that I'm trying to bring to workplaces. And the reality is, I think Nick could probably make more money someplace else. I know Bianca could make more money someplace else. I know, by the way, I could make more money someplace else. Like, it's true for all of us. And that's also part of the risk with this journey that I'm taking is I might make that money at Hummingbird. It's possible, and we all might be able to get there. So it's really exciting that I have found people that believe in the vision and the purpose of what we stand for. And I think that's really been the why behind why everyone works at Hummingbird is people will reach out to us and say, hey, I'd love to be part of what you're doing. I love, or those compliment and say, hey, you're doing great work. If you ever need help, I would love to be considered for that. So what we're offering and what we're proposing for how workplaces can do better at creating environments where humans thrive, it resonates for people. And that's really rewarding. And we have some collateral, of course, that we've developed that we share. There's a 2-page PDF that's titled Who We Are. And part of that, the message on there is we're trying to create a workplace that is indicative of what we're trying to get you to create in other workplaces. By the way, it's hard. Living by our own values, like practicing what you preach is not always easy. But I also want to be able to sit across from a CEO and say, everything I'm suggesting that you do, I'm doing it myself. And I'm finding that it's worth it because people want to work here and they stay when they join.
Can you just talk us through briefly, maybe like a couple of key takeaways when you talk about that 2-page PDF and just really living the values? What do you think is key, even for kind of a smaller boutique firm, to keep in mind if you want to be able to attract and also retain really great people, have that culture, have the values where people really want to stick around and contribute? What are a couple of things that stand out to you, Brian, that a leader should really be focusing on to cultivate that right environment?
Yeah. And the first thing I'll say is every environment is different and every organization is different. So you have to figure out, what do you stand for? What do you believe in? What's important to you? What are your values? And we also do help organizations define their organizational values. It's one of the things that we can help them with. And those values, when they're defined, are most powerful when they're actually indicative of the culture that already exists and they're not aspirational. So for us, what we've tried to do is be clear on our mission, vision, values. So everyone at Hummingbird, I believe, could say that we are committed to amplifying the voices of the unheard. It's a sentence that they can get their heads around, they can believe in, they buy into. And it also resonates because all of them are members of those communities that we're amplifying. So that has, I think, been something that has been helpful, is that clarity on the mission, vision, values. And this is the part that has been interesting for us in the DEI space is we're clear on how we do the work. So there's a broad range of ways that organizations, DEI consulting firms, and come in and do this work. And I believe one of the challenges with this work is that it's often focused on shame, blame, and guilt. Like, hey, you should feel bad because this happens to other people and you're in power and privilege. Like, I'm not going to pretend that systems of oppression don't exist. But if I come in and say, Michael, you're doing a terrible job, you're a horrible human, you're like, why do I want to work with you? So we have a very specific point of view, which is we ignite our shared humanity through building bridges of trust. And through those building bridges of trust between different people that work together, we can open the door to understanding how systemic oppression impacts each of us differently. So we can then create workplaces where humans thrive. So we have a different approach to that. And we've had a couple of people that were part of our contract team that said, actually, I want to be more of an activist in how I show up, and they don't fit. And that's okay. Like, we need them. Like, I love them and I will continue to support them and amplify their voices as well. But so there's not only what we're doing, what we believe in, but how we do it. And that, I think, has been really important. And then there's I think the last thing I would just offer here is being able to practice what you preach. So something that I was able to do this year that I really loved was every employee of Hummingbird got $200 to give away to a charity of their choice. And we believe that part of DEI work is also social impact of how you're giving back to the communities that allow your organization to exist. So that was a small way for us to give back. And there's lots of other examples that I can share, but hopefully the team could share as well, that say, not only do we say these things, but we actually show up and do these things.
Yeah, great. I appreciate you sharing those with us. So before we wrap up, Brian, and I want to make sure that people can learn more about you and everything going on at Hummingbird and your work over there, a couple of quick questions. First is, as a leader of your company, you have obviously a growing team, as you've mentioned. I'm wondering, what are maybe a couple of habits that you're bringing into your life or are part of your life on a regular basis that you feel really contribute to your performance, to your focus, to your overall success?
So something that I'll share two sides of this. So one of the things that has happened for me, let's just say at least a couple times, maybe a handful of times, is I have gotten myself to burnout and I've said I have to tap out for a minute. And so that feels unstructured and doesn't feel like it's how I want to show up. So something that I am working on is, what is my self-care plan? What is my self-care journey? Putting my oxygen mask on first is a very real thing. And not only am I doing that, I'm also talking openly about it with the team to say, hey, this is what happened. I wish I would have handled it differently or better. Here's what my plan is. So I also just try to own my stuff. And something that I've actually done that I didn't do this with intentionality. I just did it because I need to block time on my calendar. I go to therapy once a week and it's on my calendar and it says therapy. And I also sometimes have a neighbor that we go for a walk during the day and I put walk on my calendar. And the team has said, putting those moments on the calendar, because everyone can see my calendar, they know that, oh, it gives them permission to also practice self-care. So that's been really important. So I think that sort of broader self-care conversation and journey is really the biggest thing for me. I'm fortunate to have a lot of skills at my disposal that I was blessed with, but if I overdo it, then of no use to anyone. The other one I would really highlight is to realize I don't have all the answers. And so I have a coach who is much more experienced than I do. I still lean on my trusted advisors and mentors, and I have phenomenal humans that work for me. And I not only ask for their guidance and counsel, but I also encourage them to challenge me, particularly with the work that we do. I don't live in the shoes of a woman or a person of color or a millennial or Gen Z. So, hey, if I'm missing something, say, Brian, you're missing something. You got to hear the rest of the story. So I really invite those conversations. And if I get something wrong, I apologize for it. And that engendering trust allows us to work together more effectively as a team. So all of that sort of comes together.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then final question for you is, last 6 months or so, one book, could be fiction or nonfiction, that you have read or listened to that you really enjoyed and that you would recommend to someone?
This is such a good question, Michael. And I have just started to challenge myself. Like, I got to read books again, Brian. I have lots of books on my shelf. So I'm going to own that wholeheartedly. Actually, I just started reading the latest Nicholas Sparks novel, Just for Pleasure. So I can't remember the name of it, but if you look it up, it'll be out there. The book, though, that I'll just offer as a different twist on this question is the book that I have pulled out that I want to read, because I used to read it every year, is The Last Lecture. There's actually two of them, The Last Lecture and Tuesdays with Maury, which are both perspectives on how to live a wholesome life and how to be a good human. So I'm going to revisit those over the course of the next few weeks.
Fantastic. I've actually heard about the Maury book, but I've never read it. So you're reminding me I need to probably check that out. So I appreciate the reminder.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Maury in his book is diagnosed with a terminal illness. And so he already has a life philosophy, but he shares his life philosophy, which is really, really beautiful. And similarly, The Last Lecture, Randy Pausch is also diagnosed with a terminal illness. And the last sort of third of his book are some of his words of wisdom. And I guess I should mention at this point that part of the reason I haven't read a lot is because I've been avoiding finishing the edits on my manuscript. So any engagement with a book is sparking that oh, someone else is going to read my book. And some people aren't going to like it. And that's a little bit nerve-wracking, but it's exciting. And I'm looking forward to sharing it.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you brought up the point around self-care, because I think so often as entrepreneurs and business owners, we're all just kind of heads down, focused on building and growing. And it's easy to kind of see that future destination. We're working hard toward it, but we don't often make enough time to just appreciate and enjoy the journey and the time that we have right now. So I think it's a good reminder for everyone to really think, why are you doing what you're doing? And how can you make sure that you can be in it for the long term, not just a short sprint, right? It's like a marathon, not a sprint, as people often say. So to finish off, where can people go and where should they go to learn more about Hummingbird and about your work and just to see everything you have going on?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say something about what you just mentioned. Yesterday, I had the chance to spend the afternoon with Jackie Romano, who is a videographer and a documentarian, someone I've had a chance to work with, and phenomenal human. And we were talking about all this stuff with Hummingbird. And she said, Brian, do you ever pause and say, hey, wow, it's really cool that all of this stuff is happening. You have a business and a team, and you have a book coming out, and you have a children's book you've published, and so on and so on. And I do spend a lot of time focusing on gratitude, but not necessarily about the gratitude for my success. It's gratitude for the opportunities that have been open for me and people that have shown up for me. But yeah, and I think it's a good reminder for us as entrepreneurs that it's okay to have those moments to say, wow, this is pretty awesome that I got to do this and that I get to do this. So I just wanted to mention that for just in the spirit of Jackie nudging me along, because it's so important.
It's a really great comment. So often you're right. We tend as entrepreneurs to just look forward and not actually look back and think about what have we actually accomplished. And we're so focused on the future that we don't actually feel like we've accomplished that much. But if you, as you mentioned, pause for a moment and look at where you came from and how much you have accomplished, it's in most cases quite a bit that we should be grateful for and just kind of take stock of and help us to move to that next place.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. And so in that spirit, there are ways you can find me because I've had a chance to grow these ways. So the best way to connect with me, if you're sort of looking for my professional perspectives on the world, is just my LinkedIn channel. So just find Brian McComak on LinkedIn. You spell my last name, first name with an I, last name McComak. And if you were looking for the personal side of Brian, I'm also on Instagram at Brian McComak. For Hummingbird, the best thing to do, I would suggest, is to go to our website, hummingbirdhumanity.com, and sign up for our newsletter. We send a weekly newsletter that has stories and tools and is committed to amplifying the voices of the unheard. So you'll learn a lot about others. And of course, Hummingbird is also on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And on Instagram in particular, you can follow Bosco's Biscuits. Bosco is my dog. He's a beagle. He's a rescue beagle. And Bosco shares tips on how to be an inclusive human. So check that out.
There we go. All right. Well, we'll try and get all that linked up in the show notes. Brian, thank you again so much for coming on and spending some time with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Michael. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.